Hello. I suggest you crochet a beautiful openwork pattern. Very simple knitting. The pattern resembles a twig of leaves. It fits very simply and very quickly. The pattern is easy to remember and consists of just one row. The pattern looks the same on both sides, so it can be used for knitting a scarf or stole, for example. Such a pattern is very simple to knit and will fit different yarn thicknesses. I knitted this sample from thin cotton. In 50 grams I have 280 meters and a thin knitting hook 0.75 millimeters. Knitting begins with a very comfortable first row. It is not necessary to calculate the number of air loops, but to calculate the number of such rings. Above each ringlet there will be a strip of columns with 2 capes in the future. We perform the first loop and tie 4 air loops. The first loop, the second, third and fourth air loop. Then we perform 2 capes on the hook, and in the first air loop we will tie a column with 2 capes. Then we perform 18 air loops. The first loop, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th air loop. Then we perform 2 capes on the hook and tie a column with 2 capes into the fourth loop. 1, 2, 3, 4. We start the hook in the fourth loop. We tie a column with 2 knockikits. Further knitting will continue in exactly the same sequence. We are gaining 18 air loops. We tied a chain of 18 air loops. Then we perform 2 capes on the hook and tie a column with 2 capes into the fourth loop. So, let's tie the whole row. We tied the initial row, consisting of a chain and such rings. Then we will tie the next row. First, we perform 4 air loops. The first, second, third, and fourth air loop. Then we put 2 capes on the hook. We put the hook in a ring. We tie 4 columns with 2 capes. The first column, then the second column, the third and fourth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 7 air loops. The first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh air loop. Along the air chain we find the middle, we start the hook in the middle of the air chain between two rings. And we'll tie a column without a cape. Then we perform 6 air loops with 2 capes on the hook. We start the hook on the side of the column without a cap and tie 4 columns with 2 capes and 1 common vertex. The first column, here is the second column, the third, and the fourth column with 2 capes. Now we will tie all the loops with 1 loop. We fix the air. It turned out to be such an improvised leaf. Next, we perform 2 capes on the hook. We start the hook in the next ring, tie 4 columns with 2 capes. The first column, the second column, the third and fourth column with 2 capes. This fragment actually contains the whole pattern. Then there will be exactly the same repetition. We perform 7 air loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In the middle of the chain between the 2 rings, we find the middle and put the hook in the loop in the middle. Let's tie a column without a cape. Then we perform 6 air loops. 2 capes on the hook. We put the hook in a column without a cap on the side and tie 4 columns with 2 capes and 1 common vertex into this loop of the base. You will get a lush column consisting of 4 columns with 2 capes, resembling a leaf. We have typed. Now we tie all the loops with 1 loop, fix them with an air 1. We perform 2 capes on the hook. We start the hook in the next ring, and we tie 4 columns with 2 capes into the ring. First, second, third. And the fourth column with 2 capes. I tied the row to the end at the end. For the end of this canvas, I tied an additional column with 2 capes. Then we will link the next row. We perform 4 air loops, turn the knitting to the other side. We perform 2 capes on the hook, and over each column of the previous row we will also tie a column with 2 capes on top. In order for knitting to look neat, we insert the hook inside into the middle of the previous column. The first column with 2 capes. The second column with 2 capes is the third, and the fourth column with 2 capes. Then we perform 7 air loops. We start the hook under the air chain. We tie the column without a cape. Next, we perform 6 air loops, 2 capes on the hook. We put the hook in a column without a cap on the side and tie a lush column consisting of 4 columns with 2 capes. The third column with 2 capes and the fourth column with 2 capes. Now we will tie all the loops with 1 loop. We fix it with an air 1. We perform 2 hooks on the hook above each column of the previous row. We will tie the same columns from above. The first, then the second column, the third column, and the fourth column with 2 capes. Further knitting continues in exactly the same sequence. A chain of 7 air loops is performed, then a column without a cape, 6 air loops, a lush column consisting of 4 columns with 2 capes, and then 4 columns with 2 capes above the columns of the previous row. And so we repeat from one side and from the other side in the same way. As a result, tying row after row, this is how beauty turns out. This is how one side looks and the other side looks exactly the same. I thank you for your attention and wish you all the best. Thank you very much for the warm, pleasant words in the comments. Let's knit together.